All right, we're going to get going. We don't want to wait too long. We've only got half an hour here. So thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar on establishing goals to improve performance. Like I said, my name is Jonathan Deppel, and I am the Associate Vice President of Client Advocacy here at SQM Group. So just a few notes to take care of before we get started with the presentation. If you'd like, you can download a copy of the presentation in your GoToWebinar control window. For questions today, if you have any questions, you can go to the questions field in the GoToWebinar control window. And any questions that we don't cover answering in the webinar, we can follow up with you via email after. And lastly, if you'd like a copy of the recording, we will be sending that out early next week, as well via email, and that should be available on our website if you'd like to get it from there. So like I said, for I guess the third time now, my name is Jonathan. I am with SQM Group, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Client Advocacy. So I've been working with SQM Group for about 3 years now. I started in a more analyst role, getting into the nitty-gritty details there. If you joined our webinar on survey best practices, you would have heard me talk a bit to some of those nitty-gritty details. So I'm here on behalf of SQM, and if you don't know who SQM is, here's a little bit about us. We are an organization that focuses on helping people improve. Our mission statement, as you can see on the screen, is to help organizations improve their customer and employee experience performance one individual at a time. So we really want to drill down on how to improve each call center rep, each manager, that one individual at a time. So very timely for our discussion today on goals and improvement. So the way that we do that here at SQM is we do a lot of customer experience research. You're going to see CX all over the place, and that just means customer experience. The research we do is very targeted. We're a leading market research specialist firm for benchmarking, for tracking, and improving experiences, both customer and employee. We do that through our software, but we also do that via gathering data in our 2 call centers that we have, one in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, one in Vernon, British Columbia. And that's where we generate all of our data. We work with our clients to do often post-contact surveys to try and assess how the customer experience has been, or we do internal surveys with their employees to understand how the employee experience is. So we take that data and we do 2 different things with it, in a sense. We do our consulting, we do our awarding. Our consulting is largely based on the best practices required to improve customer experience. Again, we're focusing on improving customer experience, and we have a proven track record. So over 70% of our clients have year-over-year improvement on their customer experience. And so we will go on site with clients and do consultations on site to help them in a variety of areas. We obviously have these webinars. Thank you all for joining again. And we do what we can to help people improve. And the other piece that we do with our data is that we award top performers. So if you have top performing customer or employee experience, or if you have a best practice on how you are managing your customer experience or your employee experience, we will award those people that are either certifying past a certain level, or we will award top performers in a variety of areas and for different sizes of organizations. So we do that across North America. We also have international clients and some non-clients that if they have best practices that we can validate, we can award them, and we will invite them to our yearly conference, which if you haven't joined us yet, I would encourage anyone on the webinar to join us for our next year's conference because it's quite the event. So a little bit more about SQM Group and why you should trust us when we say that we know what we're talking about when it comes to customer experience improvement and employee experience improvement. Is that on a yearly basis, we are benchmarking with 500 plus of the leading North American contact centers. And we've been doing this for about 23 years, since 1996. It ends up working out to about 1.5 million customer surveys and about 25,000 employee surveys on a yearly basis. And we are predominantly in North America, 71% in America, 26% in Canada, 3% international. So we have a broad base of benchmarking data going back many, many years that we can pull from and benchmark our clients against. Additionally, we also have fantastic employee satisfaction in the 2 call centers that I did mention. So in a sense, we eat our own food, and we practice the best practices that we preach. So getting into some more of the meat of today's presentation. So the 30-minute webinar, we're going to learn kind of these 4 key items. So which leading CX metrics matter most to customers when they're contacting an organization? Because if we want to improve performance and we want to set goals, we need to understand what the endpoint of those goals are, and that's to improve the customer experience. The next point is the 5 key metrics for creating accountability at the CSR level for establishing goals. We'll then talk about some of the best practices for identifying and creating a process for improving CSR contact resolution performance. And then we will talk about how to keep CSR's goal-directed behaviors on course with our 4-step coaching model. So some of you might have either made statements yourself or heard managers make statements along the lines of, the metrics that customer service representatives, CSRs, the metrics that they're held accountable to improve. And this is probably more broadly applicable, across an entire organization. If somebody is held accountable to something, they're more likely to action it. And this is the accountability piece. If you want your employees to improve customer experience, you have to make them accountable to customer experience. So how do we do that? Let's talk about some of the customer experience metrics for establishing goals. And I want to start a little bit backwards here and start at the end point. What do we want to achieve with our goals and our improvement? Well, we want to improve the customer experience, like I said. And what's the rationale for that? There's a few really good pieces here. Often people are very interested in my financial side, so let's start with that. In terms of operating costs, for every 1% increase in your first contact resolution that you achieve, you can reduce your operating costs by 1%. And this makes sense. People, if they resolve their contact on the first try, they don't have to call again, which when they call again, that's taking another call rep's time. If they weren't able to achieve resolution on the first call, this might require escalation. So now you're talking about the first CSR's time, you're talking about the escalation rep's time, and that compounds very quickly. So for an average contact center that SQM works with, this 1% improvement in operating costs translates to roughly $250,000 a year. So you can see very easily a 4% increase in first contact resolution over a year could lead to $1 million in operating cost savings, which often for some of the higher ups, that can be, we can stop at bullet point 1. But we've got some more reasons. So for every 1% improvement in first contact resolution, we see an improvement in customer satisfaction. And I think that one's a pretty logical connection as well. Somebody resolves their issue, they're happier because of it. One that some people are surprised by, or we start to see some raised eyebrows about, is this next one. So for every % improvement in first contact resolution, we see a 1 to 5% improvement in employee satisfaction. And the reason that is, I think, is best explained through a little bit of, role play in your mind. So imagine yourself as a call center rep, and you work at an organization that has a first contact resolution of 50%. So what that means practically is that 1 in every 2 calls that you're receiving, you're talking to somebody that has already tried to resolve their issue and failed at resolving their issue. So they've had to call back, and they're probably not too happy about it. So in an 8-hour day, 50% of your calls are somebody that's not too happy about having to call back. That's a lot more challenging to work in an environment than a situation that has 90% FCR. 1 in 10 calls somebody's having to call back. So that's why we see that 1 to 5% improvement in employee satisfaction. Additionally, a customer that has had their call resolved is more likely to accept cross-selling or upselling, and they're also less likely to be at risk. So 98% of customers will continue to do business with an organization if they achieve that first contact resolution. So this is kind of a picture of the output that we want. This is why we want to drive towards improving customer experience. Now, how do we make the CSRs accountable to that? And we have to understand what's important to a customer when they call in. And that's where I'd like to go next. So in terms of what's most important to a customer, or their priority when they call in, it's resoundingly the ability for them to resolve their issue in one contact. So we see 55% of those that we survey indicate that finishing their call in one contact is the most important thing for them. And this should be seen as a gift. This is exciting. This is great, because from a call center rep's perspective, this is the only piece on this list that they have direct control over and that is very tangible to them. You can imagine, the other three pieces in terms of the customers being treated important, the personalized customer service, and the customer being rewarded for loyalty. Those can be very subjective from customer to customer. What would be considered important by one customer might be completely different from another. And that's very hard to establish goals and drive improvement towards that, because if you can't have a standardized method for approaching this improvement, it can be very challenging. How do you hold a rep accountable for personalized customer experience when you can't train them on it? Because personalized customer experience means something different for every single person that they talk to. Whereas resolution is something that is very tangible to a call center rep. When they have a customer on the line, they know that they are able to either help them and resolve their problem, or they're unable to do it. It's a very one-to-one connection, and something that they can grasp onto, and makes for a really good basis of goals and establish improvement plans. And the reason for this is that resolution is what we would call a leading indicator. So on this slide, we have a bit about leading indicators and lagging indicators, and ones that might be either or depending on the context. So I'll focus on the leading and lagging for today, since we have a limited time. But essentially the difference is that a leading indicator is something that people can directly influence or change. When a customer calls in, you can change whether they've been resolved or not based on how you deal with their call. Whereas a lagging indicator, something like a Net Promoter Score, CX Greatness, Net Retention Index, those are great measurements, but they're measurements of past performance. There's no way for a rep to understand how they can improve the NPS score of a customer calling in, because there are so many things that go into that NPS score for a customer responding to that question. A customer that's responding to an NPS question might want to promote the organization because they have a family member that works there, or they had a great experience at the contact center, but not necessarily that rep. They might want to promote because they got a great deal from an online web offer or something like that. It's very hard to tie specific call center rep behaviors and actions to those lagging indicators. So it's much better to tie a leading indicator to a call center rep's goals and improvement plan, because that is something that they themselves can have an impact on and can influence that change. That's not to say that the lagging indicators are not important. They can be for different levels of accountability. And so that's what we'll talk to a little bit next here. The levels of accountability can and should change based on the role in an organization. So at that very frontline level, you need to be very tangible with your goals and your objectives. And so that is why something like contact resolution is very important to focus on. Now, if you've worked with SQM at all in the past, or you've looked at our website, you'll know that we advocate very strongly for first contact resolution and one contact resolution, these SCR and OCR metrics that we have above. And the reason that those are very important for the higher levels of the organization are that they are something that can be driven to from a process improvement kind of technology perspective, and is very important for those higher ups to try and improve, because again, that FCR and OCR improvement, that is what's directly linked to operating saving costs, improving employee experience, improving customer experience. So those are very important metrics, but because the call center rep has no impact on, or not as much impact on FCR, since they have no way to determine if they are the first call that this person is making or the second call. It's more challenging to connect SCR or OCR and is not a best practice if you're trying to connect those two CSRs. So since a customer service representative might get a call and that customer is already a non-SCR call, this customer has already called in twice before, and so this representative, if they were held accountable to FCR, would take a hit on their performance for something that they had no control over. Whereas that customer that's now called in a third time, the call rep has they have control over whether they resolve that contact this time. So that's why there's this distinction between the levels of accountability in an organization and what you should hold those people accountable to. So for specifically CSR accountability, let's talk about some of the 5 metrics that SQM recommends using to create accountability. So I want to focus most of the attention on these top 3. And the reason for that is that those are the leading indicators like we just talked about. Whereas 4 and 5, those are more of a lagging indicator and something that might be useful for creating operational thresholds for, say, a performance bonus. So we have clients that will create very specific performance bonuses for the first 3, one of the first 3 metrics, either contact resolution, world-class calls, overall CSAT with the CSR. But then they'll also put that behind kind of an organizational level threshold where they say, as an organization, we need to have a contact center CSAT of this amount for people to be eligible for their performance bonuses. So again, I want to focus on these top 3. These are really the best 3 metrics to hold the CSR accountable to. Again, I've spoken to the importance of contact resolution and how that's a very tangible, achievable thing for a CSR. CSAT, very similarly, based on a call center rep's disposition, the way they close a call or open a call, that can very much influence the customer satisfaction of dealing with that CSR. And then world-class calls are a metric where we combine the contact resolution and the satisfaction with that rep to try and understand, is that the world standard, world-class call where somebody is doing everything they can to both get resolution for the customer and provide that positive experience that leads to a high customer satisfaction. So we've kind of talked about the end goal, what we want to do. We want to improve customer experience. We've talked about the metrics to do that and who should be accountable to what. So now, if we want to move into more specific developing plans or goals for CSRs, we want to look at creating reasonable goals. We want people to succeed with these goals, right? It keeps them motivated to try and improve. And so for CSRs to improve, they should identify some personal call resolution goals. They should be part of this process because it's a very two-way street. There's organizational objectives to improve customer experience, contact resolution. But the CSRs have to be able to identify with that and connect with it. One very simple way that they can improve their contact resolution, for example, is committing to a call resolution statement. So in that way, they can change the way that the customer perceives the resolution of the call. Say, for example, your utility. Customers called in and they want to schedule an appointment. Your bookings are totally filled up for the next 2 weeks, so you book them in the 3rd week. Now, if the call rep says, we've booked you in for 3 weeks, thanks for your call, bye-bye. When SQM reaches out and asks that customer, hey, was your issue resolved? The customer thinks, well, not really. They're coming out in 3 weeks and they'll resolve it then. So no, the call wasn't resolved. But by a CSR having a call resolution statement, and instead of saying, okay, bye-bye, they instead say, I've scheduled you for an appointment in 3 weeks. Have I resolved the issue for your call? And directly asking back to the customer, have we achieved resolution? Often the customer in that situation will think, I called to make an appointment. they helped me make an appointment. Yeah, you've helped me resolve my call. And the difference there is then when SQM reaches out to say, hello, customer, did they resolve your call? They're much more likely to say yes. So that's an example of a goal that a CSR could set for themselves. But more generally, when we want to create successful goals or goals that are likely to be achieved, we need to make sure that we're tracking them, right? We need to write them down. We need to be able to reference them as we're going through the improvement plan. And once we reach the end, to understand, where did we want to go and where are we, which is somewhat the reason why I wanted to approach this a little bit backwards and talking about that end goal first. You need to set short-term milestones. This is very important. There's many people that are much more driven by instant gratification to some degree, and so to have long, year-long milestones or metrics to try and achieve, it can be much less tangible for somebody trying to improve right now. I'm having a problem this week. There's been a lot of very difficult calls. How do I improve that, within this month or by next week? Short-term goals can be much easier for people to digest and feel that they have control over getting to those points. You're not running into a situation where somebody's 9 months into a 12-month goal and saying, oh, well, geez, there's no way I can get it now. No point in even trying. So to build off of that, we want to be specific in our goals. We need to know where that endpoint is and what the milestones are along that way. We need to be able to measure the actions and the progress, and we need to focus our goals onto a single goal. That's very important because there are competing interests in certain circumstances. I'll give you an example that I've seen out working with clients where they were very committed to us saying, SQM, we want to improve our call resolution. We're holding our call reps accountable to it. Their performance metrics are based around it. We're doing all of this work. Why aren't we improving as much as we thought? We went on site and did some side-by-side sitting down with their call reps. And what we realized is that not only did they have these call resolution metrics to be held accountable to, but they were also held accountable to sales goals. And so for each outbound or each call that they transferred to an outbound sales company, they were given an immediate, it was either $5 or $10 referral award. And so while their call resolution and customer experience metrics were on a monthly, quarterly goal set, these sales metrics were on an immediate instant gratification daily reward. And I'll let you guess which one that the call reps tended to prefer. But that becomes a challenge because you have these multiple goals and they might be competing. So you have to be able to identify what you want to improve and ensure that everything you're doing is working towards that goal. And to make sure you're reaching that goal, you need to schedule in time for your goals. So if you're saying you want to improve your call resolution, it can be challenging to do that on your own. You often might need either training or some sort of supplementary help to do that. And so if you're not conscious of that and you set a 1 month objective and you're not setting time aside each week to try and improve that, it can be challenging to meet that endpoint without some specific time set aside to work towards that. So the process for improving call resolution, again, CSR should focus only on one thing, possibly 1 or 2 behaviors, areas to improve upon. And focusing on more than that can set people up for failure because there's too many things to focus on and they don't know what is most important. Okay, I have 3 things to try and work on, but I only have time to do 1 of them. I don't know which one's the most important. So it's best to keep those areas of improvement to 1 or 2 behavior areas. To help CSRs be successful in improving their call resolution, they need to meet their supervisor and review their goals and behavioral statements. And this goes back to setting time aside to do this sort of thing. After the 3-month mark, if you're having some of the longer term goals, CSRs then meet with their supervisor to review their goals and performance and to see if they have improved and if they're meeting their goals. So the 4-step process that SQM advocates for doing this is to first do some call assessments. you need to take some assessments of the process in an ongoing customer survey business practice, and then with a supervisor, assess the CSR calls and determine the strengths and weaknesses of that CSR in resolving customer contacts. Once they've gotten an idea of the strengths and weaknesses of the CSR, then the supervisor needs to develop an action plan for improving that CSR's contact resolution performance. Once they've created that action plan, that's great, but they need to get buy-in from the CSR. The CSR needs to believe that that's the best option forward and that they can actually impact this action plan. And so the supervisor needs to communicate that to the CSR so that they can agree upon that in a private setting. Finally, the CSR needs to receive feedback on the areas identified in the action plan to be able to check and monitor that progress and ensure that really, the change that you're wanting to see is the change that is created. And this is a cyclical thing. So once you've improved those areas, it goes back to call assessment. What is the next thing that we can work on? How can we can improve the customer experience or the contact resolution the next 1 or 2 or 3 points? It doesn't stop. It's a continuous improvement cycle. But even though it is a continuous improvement cycle, there should be, once you've completed the first run of it, there should be a final review and feedback. And this feedback provides information about behaviors and offers an evaluation of the quality of those behaviors. So the feedback can really reinforce the existing strengths and keep goal-directed behavior on course. It clarifies the effects of the behavior and increases the recipient's ability to detect and remedy errors of their own. If you take this practice in internally, you'll notice that after a few iterations of this continuous improvement cycle of working on CSR behaviors, they'll start to self-identify. Hey, I've been noticing that this certain behavior isn't going the way that I want it to, or this opening or closing statement isn't generating the results that I thought. I'm going to try something on my own to improve it, and that's where you really get success, because then you get people that are self-motivated and they're very interested in improving for their own sake. So we're getting close to time here, but I do want to touch on this final piece, performance management system best practice success story from this past year at our SQM conferences. So if some of you aren't familiar, UPMC was an award winner this year for us, and they did something great with their performance management system. Now, whereas another company would take a very internal perspective and say, okay, we've got some outsourcers, but we are responsible for our internal call resolution metrics and our customer experience metrics. And then once it goes out to vendors, we have no control over that. That's much more commonly the story that we hear, but where UPMC shines and what they did differently is they decided that they're going to hold not only their CSRs accountable to voice of the customer, but they were going to hold their vendors accountable. And so the way this worked is that they trained their vendors on the best practices of how they wanted call handling to be done. And then for employees of the outsourcer, those that didn't meet specific call metric or CX metric thresholds, those reps were no longer allowed to work on the UPMC account. And so this created a level of accountability throughout not only the organization, but again, the vendors and the outsourcers that improve the customer experience across the board. So again, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join me today on this webinar. It looks like we've come up right to the 30-minute stopping point. So unfortunately, we won't have time to address any more questions right now. But if you do have anything, please, I do encourage you to reach out to us via email, and we will get back to you. Again, thank you all for joining. It's been a wonderful webinar.